Marcus Chen adjusted his tie and looked at the faces around the large conference table. 15 board members sat waiting for him to speak. He clicked the remote in his hand, and the screen behind him lit up with bright charts and numbers. This was the moment he had been preparing for during the last 3 years. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice steady and confident. "Today marks the beginning of a new era for TechCore Industries. Project Titan is ready for final implementation." The presentation showed images of massive warehouses filled with robots moving boxes. Mechanical arms sorted packages with perfect precision. Computers tracked every item in real time. There were no people in these images. That was the whole point. Marcus explained how the company would save $180 million every year. The board members nodded and smiled. The CFO, a woman named Patricia Reed, asked about the timeline. Marcus told her that everything would be complete within 6 months. Every warehouse in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan would become fully automated. No human workers would be needed anymore. The vote was unanimous. Project Titan was approved. 3 days later, Sarah Mitchell sat in the break room at the TechCore warehouse in Cleveland. She was eating her lunch and talking with her friend James about their weekend plans. Her phone buzzed. She looked down and saw an email from Human Resources. The subject line made her stomach drop. "Important notification regarding your employment." Sarah opened the email with shaking hands. The message was short and cold. TechCore Industries was implementing new automation technology. Her position would be eliminated in 60 days. She would receive 2 weeks of severance pay for every year she had worked. Sarah had been with the company for 15 years. That meant 30 weeks of pay. Then nothing. She looked around the break room. Everyone was staring at their phones with the same shocked expression. James was reading his email too. His face had gone pale. Maria, who worked in quality control, started crying quietly in the corner. Sarah had 3 children at home. Her oldest daughter was starting college next year. Her twins were in middle school. The mortgage on her house was not going to pay itself. 30 weeks of severance sounded like a lot, but Sarah knew it would disappear quickly. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with bills spread out in front of her. Her daughter Emma came downstairs and asked what was wrong. Sarah tried to smile, but she could not hide her worry. She told Emma about the email. Emma hugged her mother and said everything would be okay. Sarah wanted to believe that, but she was scared. Across the city, Marcus Chen celebrated with his team at an expensive restaurant. They drank champagne and talked about how TechCore would become the most efficient company in the industry. Marcus felt proud. He believed he was saving the company from becoming outdated. Other companies were automating too. TechCore needed to keep up or die. The next 6 months moved quickly. Every week, more workers received their final paychecks and cleaned out their lockers. The robots arrived in large trucks. Engineers installed new computer systems. The warehouses started to look different. Cold, empty, efficient. Sarah found a new job working at a small grocery store. The pay was less than half of what she had made at TechCore. There were no benefits, no insurance, no retirement plan. But it was better than nothing. She worked long hours and came home exhausted. James was not as lucky. He applied to dozens of jobs, but kept getting rejected. He was 53 years old, and companies wanted younger workers. His savings started running out. He had to move in with his sister. Maria found work cleaning office buildings at night. She rarely saw her kids anymore because she worked while they slept and slept while they were at school. Her husband worked 2 jobs too. They were surviving, but barely. By the end of the 6 months, TechCore had eliminated 2,400 jobs across 3 states. The warehouses ran 24 hours a day with just a handful of technicians monitoring the computers. Robots never took breaks. They never called in sick. They never asked for raises. The company's stock price jumped 30%. Investors were thrilled. Business magazines wrote articles praising Marcus Chen as a visionary leader. He gave interviews on television and at conferences. He talked about the future of work and how automation would make everything better for everyone. But in Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and Detroit, families struggled. Sarah's daughter had to delay college because they could not afford it anymore. James fell behind on his car payments. Maria's youngest son asked why they never had money for school field trips anymore. The local news ran stories about the job losses. Politicians made promises about bringing jobs back, but nothing changed. The warehouses that once employed thousands now ran with fewer than 50 people total. The towns around these warehouses started to feel empty. Stores closed because people had no money to spend. Restaurants shut down, even the grocery store where Sarah worked had to cut hours because fewer customers came in. Marcus saw these news stories sometimes, but he did not think much about them. He believed that progress always had a cost. People would adapt. They would find new jobs. The economy would adjust. This was just how things worked. At TechCore headquarters, the executives celebrated record profits. The board gave Marcus a huge bonus. He bought a new house in an expensive neighborhood. He sent his own children to private schools. Life was good for Marcus Chen. But something was starting to happen that Marcus did not notice yet. In warehouses across 3 states, the automated systems were beginning to show small problems. A robot would occasionally put a box in the wrong place. A computer would miscalculate shipping times. An algorithm would mark a good product as defective. These were tiny errors, easy to ignore. Marcus and his team assumed these were normal adjustment issues. The systems just needed time to learn and improve. They were not worried. They should have been. 8 months after the last human worker left the warehouses, Marcus Chen received a phone call that interrupted his morning coffee. It was Brad Wilson, the head of customer service operations. Brad sounded stressed. "We have a problem," Brad said. "Customer complaints are up 300% from last year." Marcus frowned. That did not make sense. The automated system was supposed to improve customer satisfaction. He asked Brad to explain. The customer service system used artificial intelligence to answer phone calls and emails. It could handle simple questions easily. But when customers had complicated problems, the AI did not know what to do. It would give the same programmed responses over and over. Customers got frustrated and angry. One customer had ordered a birthday gift for his daughter. The package arrived late and broken. When he called to complain, the AI told him to fill out a form online. He did. Nothing happened. He called again. The AI gave him the same response. After 5 calls, the man was furious. He posted angry messages on social media. Hundreds of people shared his story. Marcus told Brad to fix it. Brad said he was trying, but the AI system was complicated. They needed the human workers who used to handle difficult cases. Those workers understood emotions. They knew when to make exceptions to the rules. The AI only followed exact instructions. The same week, Marcus got another call. This time it was from Linda Torres, who managed quality control. She had bad news too. A shipment of electronic devices had been sent to stores with defective batteries. The automated quality control system had missed the problem. A human inspector would have noticed the batteries looked swollen and dangerous. The robots just scanned barcodes and moved boxes. Now, TechCore had to recall 50,000 devices from stores across the country. The recall would cost $12 million. News reports warned customers about the dangerous batteries. TechCore's reputation took a serious hit. Marcus held a meeting with his management team. He insisted these were just temporary issues. All new systems had adjustment periods. They needed to be patient and keep improving the technology. Everyone nodded in agreement, but some of them looked worried. Then the holiday season arrived. This was the busiest time of year for TechCore. Millions of packages needed to be sorted, packed, and shipped to stores and homes across America. In previous years, the warehouses had hired extra workers to handle the rush. Now, they just relied on the machines. The automated warehouse system completely failed. Robots could not handle the increased volume. The computer system became overwhelmed with orders. Packages got sent to wrong addresses. A woman in California ordered toys for her grandchildren. The toys were delivered to someone in Florida. A man in Texas ordered a new television. He received someone else's clothing instead. The warehouse robots, following their programming exactly, created impossible situations. One robot kept trying to stack boxes in a space that was already full. It could not recognize the problem and adjust. It just kept trying the same action over and over until a technician finally noticed and shut it down. Another robot damaged. Hundreds of packages because its sensor was slightly misaligned. A human worker would have noticed the problem immediately. The robot just kept working incorrectly for 3 days before anyone caught the error. Customer complaints flooded in. People demanded refunds. They canceled future orders. They wrote terrible reviews online. The problems got worse every day. Marcus worked late into the night trying to manage the crisis. He brought in extra technicians to monitor the systems, but there were not enough people who understood how everything worked. The few technicians they had were exhausted and overwhelmed by the end of December. TechCore had failed to deliver over 2 million packages on time. The company had to offer refunds and compensation to angry customers. The financial losses were enormous. The damage to the company's reputation was even worse. Meanwhile, Sral Mitchell watched the news reports about TechCore's failures with mixed feelings. Part of her felt satisfied that the company was struggling. They had thrown away experienced workers like trash. Now they were paying the price. But another part of her just felt sad. She had been proud to work at TechCore once. She had cared about doing her job well. Many of her former coworkers felt the same way. They had built that company with their hard work and dedication. Now it was falling apart. Sarah talked with James and Maria at a coffee shop one afternoon. They discussed what was happening at their old workplace. James mentioned that he had been contacted by a competing company called United Distribution. They wanted to hire him as a supervisor. The company was growing quickly because so many customers were leaving TechCore. Maria said she had been talking with other former TechCore workers online. They were sharing stories and supporting each other. Someone had created a social media group for former employees. The group now had over 1,000 members. In that group, people shared information about TechCore's problems. They posted screenshots of customer complaints. They discussed the mistakes the automated systems were making. Some former employees were even being contacted by reporters who wanted to write stories about what went wrong. Sarah noticed something interesting. Many of her former coworkers were not just sitting around feeling sorry for themselves. They were taking action. Some had started their own small businesses. Others were working for TechCore's competitors and doing well. A few had even become consultants, helping other companies avoid the mistakes TechCore had made. The knowledge these workers had gained during their years at TechCore was valuable. They understood the logistics industry. They knew how warehouses operated. They recognized problems that computers could not see. Marcus Chen did not understand this yet. He still believed the automation problems were temporary. He hired more programmers to improve the AI systems. He invested millions in upgrading the robots. He insisted that technology was the future and TechCore would succeed. But while Marcus focused on fixing the machines, something important was happening outside his view. The human workers he had discarded were becoming his biggest competition. They were not fighting TechCore with lawsuits or protests. They were simply doing what they did best, working hard, solving problems, and serving customers well. Local businesses that employed real people started advertising this fact. Talk to a real person. Their signs said, "Human customer service." Customers responded positively. They were tired of dealing with robots that could not understand their needs. As winter turned to spring, TechCore's problems continued. The company's stock price began to fall. Investors started asking uncomfortable questions. How much would it cost to fix all these problems? When would the systems work properly? Was automation really saving money if it kept causing expensive disasters? Marcus had no good answers. He just kept promising that things would get better. But deep down, he was starting to worry. Maybe he had moved too fast. Maybe he had underestimated the value of experienced human workers. Maybe machines were not ready to replace people entirely, but it was too late to admit that now. Marcus had built his entire reputation on Project Titan. Admitting failure was not an option. He had to keep pushing forward and hope the problems would eventually resolve themselves. They would not. Sarah Mitchell stood in the conference room of a building she never imagined she would enter. United Distribution, TechCore's biggest competitor, had offered her a position as operations consultant. The salary was better than what she had made at TechCore. More importantly, they wanted her expertise. The hiring manager, a man named Robert Chen, explained why they were interested in her. United Distribution was growing rapidly because customers were leaving TechCore in huge numbers. But Robert did not want his company to make the same mistakes. He wanted to find the right balance between automation and human workers. Sarah was not the only former TechCore employee sitting in that conference room. James was there too, hired as a warehouse supervisor. So was Maria, brought on to redesign the quality control process. United Distribution was actively recruiting people who had been pushed out by TechCore's automation project. This was happening all over the industry. Competing companies saw an opportunity. They hired experienced workers who knew exactly how TechCore operated. These workers understood the company's systems, its weaknesses, and its customers. They brought valuable inside knowledge to their new employers. But the former TechCore employees were not just working for competitors. Many of them had started their own businesses. A group of warehouse workers had pooled their severance pay and opened a small fulfillment company. They focused on careful, personalized service that big automated warehouses could not provide. Local businesses loved working with them. To customer service, representatives had created a consulting firm that helped companies train their support staff. Their message was simple: technology should assist humans, not replace them. Several mid-sized companies hired them, wanting to avoid TechCore's disasters. Even more powerful was what happened on social media. The former employees knew things about TechCore that the public did not. They knew about the shortcuts the company took. They knew about the system failures that never made the news. They knew about internal emails where executives dismissed safety concerns to save money. Some of these workers started sharing their stories online. They did not break any laws or reveal trade secrets. They simply told the truth about what they had experienced. They posted about how the company had treated loyal employees. They shared examples of how automation had gone wrong. One viral video showed a former technician explaining how TechCore's robots had destroyed thousands of packages during the holidays. He described how he had warned his managers about the problem weeks before it happened, but they had ignored him to save money. The video got 2 million views in 3 days. A former customer service worker created a detailed thread explaining why the AI system could not handle complex problems. She gave specific examples of customers who had been mistreated by the automated system. She included screenshots of complaints that the AI had completely misunderstood. The thread was shared over 50,000 times. These stories damaged TechCore's reputation far more than any advertising campaign could have fixed. People trusted these workers because they had no reason to lie. They were not competitors trying to steal business. They were ordinary people who had been hurt by corporate greed. Marcus Chen watched all of this with growing alarm. His team created reports tracking the negative social media content. Every week, there were more posts, more videos, more complaints. The company's public relations department tried to respond, but nothing they said convinced people. Customers were making their feelings clear. They did not want to deal with robots. They wanted human interaction. They wanted workers who could solve problems creatively. They wanted employees who cared about customer satisfaction, not just efficiency. A grassroots boycott movement started in Ohio, near TechCore's largest warehouse. Local community groups organized protests. They carried signs saying robots don't pay taxes and bring back our neighbors. They encouraged people to shop with companies that employed local workers instead of machines. The boycott spread to Pennsylvania and Michigan. Churches, community centers, and local governments supported it. They pointed out that TechCore had destroyed jobs in their communities, but still expected those communities to buy their products. That did not seem fair. Small businesses started advertising that they did not use TechCore for shipping. "We support companies that support workers," their websites announced. Some customers specifically asked where products came from, refused to buy items shipped through TechCore warehouses. Even some of TechCore's biggest corporate Customers started looking elsewhere. They worried about associating their brands with a company that had such a bad public image. They also worried about TechCore's reliability after the holiday season disasters. Sarah found herself in a strange position. She had not wanted to become a public figure, but reporters kept contacting her. They wanted to interview former TechCore workers about what had happened. At first, Sarah refused. She just wanted to move forward with her new job and her life. But then she thought about her former co-workers who were still struggling. She thought about James, who had almost lost his house before United Distribution hired him. She thought about Maria's kids, who had suffered because their mother could barely make ends meet. Sarah agreed to do an interview with a local news station. She spoke calmly and honestly about her experience. She explained how she had dedicated 15 years to TechCore, always receiving good performance reviews. Then one email had ended everything. She described the impact on her family and her community. The interview touched people. Sarah received hundreds of messages from others who had gone through similar experiences at different companies. Her story became part of a larger national conversation about automation, job loss, and corporate responsibility. Marcus tried to fight back. TechCore launched an expensive advertising campaign emphasizing innovation and progress. They created videos showing happy technicians working alongside robots. They published reports about the future of work, but nobody believed it. The advertising felt fake compared to the real stories from real workers. People could see through the corporate messaging. They knew what had really happened. Meanwhile, the workers' knowledge of TechCore systems became a weapon against the company. They knew exactly where the vulnerabilities were. When they worked for competitors, they knew how to serve customers that TechCore could not satisfy. When they started their own businesses, they knew which services TechCore had eliminated that people still wanted. Some former employees became trainers, teaching other workers about automation. They helped people prepare for an economy where machines would play a bigger role. But they also taught companies how to use automation wisely. Without destroying jobs unnecessarily, others became advocates, working with labor unions and political groups to push for better protections for workers facing automation. They testified at government hearings. They met with legislators. They shared their expertise about what had gone wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. The network of former TechCore employees stayed connected. They helped each other find jobs. They shared information about which companies were good to work for. They supported each other's new businesses. They had become a community bound together by their shared experience. TechCore had treated these workers as disposable. The company had assumed that getting rid of them would have no consequences. But Marcus and his fellow executives had badly miscalculated. They had failed to understand that experience, knowledge, relationships, and reputation all mattered. You could not simply replace those things with machines. The workers had not disappeared after being laid off. They had not quietly accepted their fate. Instead, they had done what humans do best. They adapted. They connected with each other. They learned. And they fought back, and they were winning. The fire started at 2:15 in the morning at the Pittsburgh warehouse. A robot carrying lithium batteries malfunctioned and dropped its load. The batteries ruptured on impact. Within seconds, flames spread across the warehouse floor. The automated fire suppression system activated. It was not designed for this type of fire. Water made lithium fires worse. The flames grew larger. Smoke filled the massive building. The robots continued working for several minutes because their programming did not include instructions for evacuating during a fire by the time the city fire department arrived. Half the warehouse was engulfed. It took 6 hours to control the blaze. Nobody died because there were so few people working overnight. Only 3 technicians had been on duty, and they escaped safely. But the damage was catastrophic. Investigators later determined that a human supervisor would have prevented the entire disaster. The robot that malfunctioned had been showing warning signs for days. Its movements had become slightly erratic. An experienced worker would have noticed and taken it offline for inspection. But the monitoring system only flagged major failures, not subtle problems. The fire destroyed $40 million in inventory. The warehouse itself suffered another $30 million in damage. But the worst consequence was yet to come. The safety investigation revealed that TechCore had violated multiple regulations. Federal law required certain levels of human supervision in warehouses storing hazardous materials. TechCore had reduced supervision below legal minimums to save money. The company claimed their automated monitoring systems were sufficient. But regulators disagreed. The fines totaled $65 million. But that was just the beginning. Insurance companies refused to cover the full losses because TechCore had not disclosed the reduced supervision. Lawsuits followed from employees who claimed unsafe working conditions and from customers whose products had been destroyed. Marcus Chen stood in the ruins of the warehouse 3 days after the fire. His expensive suit was covered in ash. His face looked 10 years older. Reporters shouted questions at him, but he had no good answers. How could he explain that pursuing efficiency had led to this? The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Patricia Reed, the CFO who had once praised Project Titan, now demanded explanations. The company's stock had dropped 40% in the week since the fire. Investors were panicking. Major customers were canceling contracts. Marcus presented a recovery plan. They would rebuild the warehouse with better safety systems. They would hire more human supervisors. They would improve the monitoring technology. But board members kept asking the same question. How much would this cost? The answer was staggering. Fixing all the problems Marcus outlined would cost over $200 million. That was more than the company had saved through automation in 18 months. One board member, an older man named Gerald Foster, asked a devastating question. Why don't we just go back to the old system? Why don't we rehire the workers we laid off? Marcus tried to explain that you could not simply reverse course. The workers had moved on. They had new jobs. Many were angry at TechCore and would not return. The company's reputation was destroyed. Going backward was not an option. But Gerald's question hung in the air. Everyone in that room was thinking the same thing. They had made a terrible mistake. The next month brought more bad news. United Distribution released their quarterly earnings report. They had grown by 35%, largely by taking customers from TechCore. In their earnings call, United Distribution's CEO credited their success to combining advanced technology with experienced human workers. The message was clear: automation could be valuable, but completely eliminating people was a disaster. Other competitors reported similar growth. Companies that had maintained hybrid human-machine operations were thriving. TechCore, which had gone all-in on full automation, was collapsing. Marcus tried desperately to hire back some of the workers he had laid off. The company offered jobs with higher pay and better benefits. Some workers were willing to listen, but they demanded things Marcus was not prepared to give. James told the recruiter who contacted him that he would only return if he was promoted to senior management with a guaranteed 5-year contract. He also wanted TechCore to hire back his entire former team and give them all raises. The recruiter said that was impossible. James shrugged and said he was happy at United Distribution. Maria demanded triple her former salary and full benefits that included tuition assistance for her children. She also wanted a written apology from the company for how they had treated workers. TechCore refused. Maria stayed at her new job. Sarah did not even respond to TechCore's messages. She was too busy helping United Distribution grow. Why would she return to a company that had thrown her away? The few workers who did agree to return found a nightmare situation. The automated systems were breaking down constantly. The remaining technicians were overwhelmed and exhausted. Nobody really understood how all the systems worked together anymore. The original engineers who had designed everything were long gone. Problems multiplied faster than anyone could fix them. In the Cleveland warehouse, a software bug caused robots to miscategorize thousands of items. It took 2 weeks to sort out the mess manually. In Detroit, a power surge damaged critical computer systems. The warehouse had to close for 5 days while repairs were made. Customer complaints continued at record levels. TechCore's customer satisfaction rating fell to the lowest in the industry. Every week, major clients announced they were switching to other companies. Every week, TechCore's revenue dropped further. The stock price kept falling. By 18 months after Project Titan's launch, TechCore's value had decreased by 60%. Investors who had once praised Marcus now wanted him fired. Shareholder lawsuits accused company leaders of mismanagement and fraud. The financial media that had celebrated Marcus as a visionary now wrote articles calling him reckless and short-sighted. Business professors used TechCore as a case study of how not to implement automation. Marcus's name became associated with failure instead of innovation. In a particularly bitter moment, Marcus watched a news interview with Sarah Mitchell. She was being featured as an example of worker resilience. The reporter asked her what she would say to Marcus if she could. Sarah thought for a moment, then answered calmly. I would tell him that people are not just costs on a spreadsheet. We are not machines that can be swapped out for newer models. When you treat workers like they do not matter, eventually it comes back to hurt you. We built that company. We made it successful. He threw us away and destroyed everything we had built together. The interviewer asked if Sarah felt vindicated seeing TechCore struggle. She shook her head. I am not happy about what happened. A lot of people are suffering because of these failures, including workers who still depend on that company. I just hope other companies learn from this mistake. Marcus turned off the television. He sat in his expensive office, looking at reports full of red numbers. His phone kept buzzing with messages from angry investors. His assistant kept scheduling meetings with lawyers. He thought about the day he had presented Project Titan to the board. How confident he had been. How certain that automation was the answer to everything. How blind he had been to the consequences. Patricia Reed called him late that evening. Her voice was cold and formal. The board had voted. Marcus Chen was being removed as CEO, effective immediately. He would receive his contracted severance package. But he needed to clean out his office by the end of the week. Marcus sat in silence after the call ended. He had lost everything. His job, his reputation, his vision of the future. All because he had believed machines could replace the human workers who had made TechCore successful in the first place. The consequences were not just theoretical anymore. They were very real. They were destroying everything he had built. 3 years after Project Titan launched, TechCore Industries filed for bankruptcy protection. The announcement came on a gray Tuesday morning in November. The company that had once been valued at $8 billion was now worth almost nothing. The bankruptcy proceedings were complicated and painful. Lawyers argued over who would get paid from what was left. Creditors fought for their share. Customers demanded refunds for failed deliveries. Workers who were still employed wondered if they would receive their final paychecks. Marcus Chen was not involved in any of it. After being fired, he had disappeared from public life. He declined all interview requests. He did not attend industry conferences. Rumors said he was working as a consultant for a tech company in Seattle, but nobody knew for sure. The man who had once been celebrated in business magazines was now a cautionary tale. The bankruptcy court decided to break up TechCore and sell the pieces to different buyers. United Distribution bought the Cleveland warehouse and immediately began converting it back to a hybrid human-robot operation. A smaller logistics company purchased the Detroit facility. The Pittsburgh warehouse, still damaged from the fire, was sold to a real estate developer who planned to demolish it and build something else. Sarah Mitchell stood in the Cleveland warehouse on a cold morning in January. She was there as a consultant for United Distribution. The company had hired her to help manage the transition. It felt strange to be back in this building where she had worked for 15 years. The place looked different now. The robots were still there, but they were being reprogrammed to work alongside human employees instead of replacing them. New workers were being trained to supervise the automated systems. Break rooms that had been empty for years were being renovated. Robert Chen, the manager who had first hired Sarah at United Distribution, walked with her through the warehouse. He explained their vision. Technology would handle repetitive tasks that machines did well. Human workers would manage complex problems that required judgment and creativity. The two would complement each other instead of competing. Sarah helped design the new workflow. She knew this warehouse better than anyone. She understood which jobs could be automated safely and which needed human oversight. Her experience from watching Project Titan fail had taught her exactly what not to do. Over the next few months, Sarah's consulting firm grew rapidly. Companies across the country wanted her advice. They had all watched TechCore's collapse and wanted to avoid the same fate. Sarah and her team helped them find the right balance between efficiency and humanity. She made a point of hiring other former TechCore workers. James joined her firm as a senior consultant. Maria headed up the quality control division. They brought in dozens of people who had lost their jobs 3 years earlier. Now they were helping shape the future of the entire industry. The lessons from TechCores. Failure spread far beyond the logistics business. Universities created case studies analyzing what went wrong. Business schools taught courses about the disaster. Government agencies drafted new regulations requiring minimum human supervision in automated warehouses. Sarah found herself testifying before a congressional committee investigating automation and employment. She sat at a table in a formal hearing room in Washington, D.C., surrounded by cameras and politicians. She had never imagined being in such a situation. A senator from Ohio asked her to explain what had happened at TechCore. Sarah spoke clearly and honestly. She described how the company had eliminated experienced workers to save money. She explained how the lack of human judgment had led to safety violations, customer service disasters, and eventually the catastrophic fire. But Sarah also made an important point. She was not against automation. Technology could make work easier and more efficient. The problem was not the robots themselves. The problem was the decision to eliminate people entirely instead of finding ways for humans and machines to work together. Workers are not the enemy of progress, Sarah told the committee. We want companies to succeed. We want to use new technology. But we also have value that cannot be programmed into a computer. Our experience, our judgment, our ability to adapt to unexpected situations. Our understanding of customer needs, these things matter. Companies that recognize this will thrive. Companies that ignore it will fail, just like TechCore did. Her testimony was broadcast on news channels and shared widely online. People across the country heard her message. Workers in other industries facing automation felt validated. Business leaders started reconsidering their plans for replacing human employees with machines. Sarah received hundreds of letters and emails from people thanking her. Many shared their own stories of job loss and struggle. Others were workers in companies planning massive automation projects who felt scared about their futures. Sarah read every message, even though she could not respond to them all. Meanwhile, former executives of TechCore faced their own reckonings. Patricia Reed, the CFO, took a job at a much smaller company with a fraction of her former salary. The business world had lost trust in her judgment. Gerald Foster, the board member who had questioned Project Titan too late, retired early and stopped attending industry events. None of them faced criminal charges. They had not broken any laws, just made terrible business decisions. But their reputations were permanently damaged. They would always be known as the people who destroyed a successful company through arrogance and short-sighted thinking. Marcus Chen's fall was the hardest. Articles were still being written about him years later, analyzing his mistakes. Business ethics courses used his decisions as examples of what happens when leaders prioritize efficiency over people. His name became shorthand for failed automation projects. There were reports that Icus had tried to get funding for a new business venture, but could not find investors willing to trust him. His LinkedIn profile was no longer public. He had effectively vanished from the business world he had once dominated. 5 years after the bankruptcy, Sarah sat in her office, looking at a news article about automation trends. The reporter had interviewed her about changes in the industry. Companies were now much more careful about automation. They invested in training programs to help workers adapt to new technology. They maintained hybrid workforces. They learned from TechCore's mistakes. The article noted that employment in logistics had actually grown over the past few years, even as automation increased. Companies discovered that humans and machines working together were more effective than either alone. Workers who learned to operate and supervise. Automated systems were in high demand. Sarah's daughter Emma was finishing her junior year at college now. Sarah had been able to help pay for her education with income from the consulting firm. Her twins were doing well in high school. The financial struggles that had consumed Sarah's life after losing her tech core job were behind her now. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the devastating email that ended her career, the months of uncertainty and fear, the anger at being treated as disposable, the decision to fight back not with protests, but with excellence, showing what experienced workers could accomplish. TechCore's story had ended in bankruptcy and failure, but Sarah's story had a different ending. She had survived, adapted, and ultimately thrived. So had many of her former colleagues. They had proven that you could not simply erase human workers and replace them with machines without consequences. The lesson was clear and would not be forgotten. Progress and technology were important, but so were people. Companies that understood this balance would succeed. Those that did not would face the same fate as TechCore Industries. Sarah closed her laptop and looked out her office window. The sun was setting over the city. Tomorrow, she would meet with another company that wanted advice on implementing automation responsibly. She would help them avoid the mistakes that had destroyed TechCore. The consequences of trying to push humanity out had been severe and complete. But from that disaster had come wisdom, new opportunities, and a better understanding of how to move forward. The future would include both advanced technology and valued human workers. That was the only path that made sense. And Sarah Mitchell, once a warehouse worker whose job was eliminated by robots, was now one of the people helping to shape that future. The world had learned its lesson. People mattered.